Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Evil. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I love the theme behind this episode being like the demon of memes, which I think is such an interesting thing, like how memes can be used as, and as we see in this episode where Leland is giving Cheryl the job of being a troll. It's like, oh, and I love that whole thing of like, right, back in the day, it'd be 80% Lucifer, 20% his follower, and now the numbers have been switched around. That's how you do the most evil. But the point is to not go too evil, because if you go too evil, you send people spiraling and they'll go to God. And it's like, so you have to strike the right balance. Keep, the whole aspect of, keep people doom scrolling. Just keep them a little uneasy, a little off kilter is kind of the whole point of it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And I thought that was an interesting parallel where all this stuff with visiting Jack is happening, and at the same time, Cheryl is given tasks by Leland. He's like, yeah, you have to do these tasks, and you can't ask why. And there's kind of a similar thing going on with, like I say, with the whole visiting Jack thing. So, and I also think it's interesting too. I think technically the Rose thing back in season 1 connected all of her daughters, but it does seem interesting with every new season and stuff like that. As the story has progressed, there typically is like a one-off story really concerning one of Kristen's daughters. I'm trying to think. Do correct me in the comments down below. Lynn's got hers this episode. This was kind of like her thing. Yes, the other daughters were involved, but this was kind of like mainly her thing. Because also, yeah, they kind of all got mixed up in the elevator thing, didn't they? I think they got last season. But I want to say the youngest hasn't had anything on her own, has she? I don't think so. I don't think she, maybe, the head in the toilet thing might be her thing, but, I don't think, because each one of the kids have had, their own solo thing, the second, I think she's the second oldest. The other one I think she's older than Alexis, she's the one that dealt with her friend and her dad being a zombie, that whole thing last season. So I think that's such an interesting little detail. Yeah, they have group things they're involved in, but then they kind of typically have individual things that they're kind of going through and dealing with that kind of touch on that evil supernatural route to some extent. So I think that's interesting. Focusing on the visiting Jack, let's kind of stay on that. It reminds me of, I haven't gotten these in so long, but there used to be that, I don't even know if they still go on anymore because I haven't seen them since I was a kid. It makes you almost wonder, I think that's the whole point, to strike you when you're a kid. But there's the whole thing of you have to, those email chain things. They're you have to send this to blah, blah, blah amount of people. It'll be this long-winded thing, and it'll be almost if you don't do this, something terrible is going to happen in a couple days or something. I've not gotten one of those since I was in high school. To be fair, I don't check my email like that. Because most of my social media is connected to my email, so it's usually don't bother checking them. So it's that type of situation. So I haven't gotten those, or at least if I have, I haven't read one in so long. But I feel like that's probably something that is more targeted at teenagers and stuff like that. So maybe that's kind of the point. Because notice everyone related to the visiting Jack. Well, it's been family houses that ended up getting where something terrible happened, sure. But at the end of the day, the people that were kind of getting involved in all of this were teenagers, because the person who had killed themselves was someone that went to the school. Ren, it's also affected. This is someone that Lynn goes to school to, so someone she obviously likes. So that was just kind of the interesting element of that. It's but it's also part of that bigger picture of the social media thing. Not only just how it all got resolved, but even just because remember that. God, what was it called? There was something super dark a couple years ago that was kind of spreading online where kids were hurting themselves because of it. I think the show's tackled something already like this, of that vein, in previous seasons, I believe. There was something like that. There's also the weird Charlie thing for a couple years ago. That lane is just, it's very true to life, and it's just almost because some of that you just kind of forget because it fades from the back of your mind, and then this episode brought so much of that. I'm I haven't thought about some of that, especially I said, the email chain thing. It's not the same thing, but that in particular, I'm I haven't thought about that in over a decade type of situation. Either way, I'm going on this whole tangent. I guess maybe they're just very technologically savvy, but it does make you wonder how they were able to block the views, because what I meant was when Ben was trying to like kind of Google map those houses and kind of get the street view of them. At one point, trying to get a look at visiting Jack, he couldn't. His sister had to like run a program like layers upon layers upon layers to kind of get the original image back because it was being blocked. I guess they're just very tech savvy and know how to block it on their ends in the long run. Because initially they ran into that guy Phoebus, and very, very, very particular name, which I thought was interesting. And he was saying like, oh no, like visiting Jack lets me stay here. And he was really upset when his picture was taken. So I guess that should have been like the first time, but it's like, yeah. Because, you know, Lynn's friend Ren won't even go out of his room. He's watching all this stuff. He thinks visiting Jack's going to come and kill him, which is like, man, that shows you how jacked up people are. Because the resolution to this turns out that Phoebus and his buddy who does the street view stuff are the ones who orchestrated this whole thing. It was a scam just to get social media presence and stuff like that, which is like, oh God, if that's not, if that hasn't been the wild, wild west of the internet over the past couple years, you know, it's just like, oh, people doing whatever it takes for a social media presence. It's like, oh, you know, that's a larger commentary on, you know, that in itself. But that is kind of, it's like, man, you have to, it shows how much of a piece of shit you are that you're doing that. You're scaring people. Because what added to the legend, especially in Ren's case, for him, it's because he found out it wasn't just that one house. There were other houses as well associated with visiting Jack. I mean, they did a good job of scaring the crap out of people by, like, having visiting Jack at all these different places. And at each of those places, something tragic happened. But they did that on purpose to kind of build hype and suspense around the visiting Jack legend and such, so that ended up playing into that whole situation. So, and one of the houses in particular, because the moment Kristen saw that person, I was like, oh, I thought was, for whatever reason, I immediately thought like, oh, is that her cop buddy from the one who kind of found out what she did and kind of let her go last season? I thought that was her cop buddy. It's like, no, it's LaRue's wife, widow. You're like, oh, ugh. And the moment she's like, oh, we should go there. And then like both David and Ben are like, no, we don't have to. And it's like, Kristen's like, no, it's okay. David knows, but Ben just has speculation, but he pretty much knows at this point in time. So they're just like, we don't have to, but she decides to go anyway. And it's like, you know, Kristen does kind of feel, it's like, yeah, being back at the place where it all happened. And even his wife, well, because she's met someone new. And for her, it's like, oh, it took a lot for me to come back here. It's like, because, yeah, what happened to Orson happened here. And we got a little cut of, you know, Kristen doing her thing. It's just like, it's still wild to think about. She straight up murdered him and just kind of got away with it. It feels like this wouldn't be, like, typical stories, you would always feel like, oh, the protagonist would always pull back and never cross that line. In some cases, not all cases, but in this case, you would have never thought Kristen would do it. And it's still like, man, we're 2 seasons away from that. And it's still kind of crazy. I mean, to be fair, she confessed to it kind of twice last season and kind of got away with it in one instance. And she's kind of worried about not really getting away with it the other instance with the whole her and David thing, which we'll get to later. But just thought that was fascinating. And I'm curious if that's going to come up anymore going forward, because that just had to be like an awkward situation. Even Ben kind of looking to Kristen after, it's like, oh yeah, like when the moment his widow had mentioned like, oh yeah, it happened here and everything, so even more reason for it to kind of be tough to come back and everything. And once again, they even suspect her. Kristen's like, oh yeah, I heard about that. It's like, yeah, I know you did, because you made sure that she had an alibi so that she wouldn't take the fall for the murder. So either way, some other elements to this, Lynn had to do some tasks, and it was really interesting task. One of the ones she ended up doing was, well, one, you have to punch a teacher in the, I think it didn't say specifically you had to punch a teacher in the face. You had to have sex with a virgin. You have to go to like the 13th ledge of a building and then like do 13 jumping jacks. And I'm blanking on what the 7th one was. It was crazy ones like that. And you're like, okay. And, you know, Kristen had asked her, it's like, right, I heard you drunk one of my, like, one of my drinks. And it's like, yeah, like, you can't lie, don't lie to me anymore, Lynn. Because it's like, right, one of the tasks is having sex with the virgin, and she's like, I didn't. It's like, but did Rin? And she's like, no, me and Rin did not have sex. I promise you. It's like, you're like, did she not? I don't know. So I think she's being truthful, but either way, that was really interesting. Just the whole concept of that, once again, the meme aspect, the trolling aspect of just how that is a form of evil in its own right, and how that whole storyline connects, and because you almost go like, it was already started before Cheryl got that job from Leland, so it makes you wonder, was anyone else in that building working on that? Maybe someone kind of gave that idea, like online or whatever, kind of maybe Phoebus and his buddy got that idea because someone in that building, that she's working now, kind of set that up, because it's very troll-esque what this whole visiting Jack thing was, so maybe there's a correlation there. Some other elements to the episode. First and foremost, we're still dealing with that head that Andy flushed down the toilet, because the youngest, she saw a whole bunch of blood coming out of the toilet, so the question is like, okay, what's going on with that? Then as the episode progresses, like, you hear it more and more of like, okay, there's something weird going on, to the point at the very end of the episode, you hear the pipes the toilet is like literally growling like a monster, so you're like, okay, that's not spooky and weird and creepy, so like that's going to be an issue. I guess it's going to, because it's stuck in the drain particularly, maybe like the pipes have been like, there's like a smidge of a curse on the house now to some extent, maybe like it's keeping like some bad juju in the house or something, maybe that's what that is, and that's going to be an issue in some shape or form, aside from just a bloody toilet. That might be something we see like progress over the course of the season, just be a background thing that's not a main thing, but it's just something we pop in and check in on from time to time. We also have that guy Eddie buying the business, because the additions that Andy wants to make to the house would cost a lot more than like they were going to get from the business initially, and so he wants more money. In fact, a guy wants to buy it for $800,000. The moment that came up, I was like, that's probably sinister. Didn't expect it to be Eddie. That was really interesting. I was like, hey, that's interesting. And even Cheryl, because I was like, oh, of course, like whoever it is, of course someone connected all this would buy the business, because I'm like, maybe you're going to use it for evil and something. But it's like, no, well, yes and no. It seems like Cheryl's doing it just to kind of stick it to them, because I'm assuming she's going to try and isolate Kristen from Andy, so she can worm her way back in, or just either that's a middle finger to Andy because he's the one that kicked her out and convinced Kristen to do it too. Because Leland is going to help her get a house, like with her new job and everything, and it's also going to be a means of staying near her grandchildren. It's kind of, I love that's the main motivation. It's not really about your own daughter anymore. It's more so about your grandchildren in particular. It does make you wonder, was this whole Eddie thing part of the whole Leland I wonder, were those part of the task that she was given that she can't question, or was that just kind of a separate thing in its own entirety? Was it something they all wanted to do? Was it Cheryl's idea? Questions like that. But she knew that Kristen would accept the whole offer and the deal, because she said that Kristen's the practical one, and it's a lot of money that they need. But once again, Andy would have to be gone for like 3 months. It's like everything's set up to always make it so that Andy's always away, because it's always like the really weird stuff always tends to happen when Kristen's having to juggle her job plus all of this, and even she says like being a single mom sucks, and he's like, I know, but this will be the last trek. She's like, just don't die out there. It's like, yeah, but you can't trust Eddie. Who knows what kind of crazy shit he's got planned too, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I was almost hoping Kristen would say like no and just that kind of screw everything up, but of course, everything's going to play out the way they want it to, and how they're going to take advantage of this, how it's going to work in their favor, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But another element to this episode is David getting visited by the entity, or rather, the guy's like, we're not the entity. There's no like secret organization in the Vatican. We're just were just friends to the Vatican, and they want David to join in because David's kind of done like the whole rigmarole of just like priesthood. It's just like, right, the confessions, the lady being like, I hate my husband. And it's just like, okay, just not, it wasn't it hasn't been as fulfilling as he thought it would be. To be fair, he's only been a priest for a little more than a week, what they say, like 8 days. So yeah, understandable. Then like him sitting with the other fathers, the other priests, and they're slurping their soup, and it's just kind of like, okay. And just the job isn't kind of what he was kind of hoping it would be, and just he even feels like, am I really serving God? So the guy's like, hey, do you want to be a friend to the Vatican? You kind of have to say yes, but if you do this, you can't tell anyone, not Ben, not Kristen, not the Monsignor, not Andrea. So yeah, I wonder would Andrea be okay with him doing this or not? Because her whole thing is about him being kind of more in tune with. She wants David to be more prepared for the fight against evil, which this guy fights evil too. But their thing is, David fights more the supernatural. It's like, well, you face two sorts of evil. You know that evil can reveal itself in the supernatural variety, also the human variety. David and them, the assessors, they kind of typically handle the more supernatural side of things, whereas this guy well, I think he probably deals with both, but in particular, the human element can be more evil than even the supernatural sometimes, which is a scary thought. But he had David do these tasks, and it just happened to be these tasks that constantly overlapped with his other jobs. And it's like, right, he's having to kind of take those have to take priority over what they were working on at the time, the whole visiting Jack thing. Ben and Kristen Goodell was like, okay, something's definitely off. Even Ben asking, he's like, is there anything between you two? She's like, no. She's like, things have just kind of been, and then she like puts her like hair behind her, like kind of adjusts her hair again. And you're just like, yeah, that's just all. That's a telltale that like Ben can easily see through. It's like, okay, there's something there. I just don't know what. I don't know if it. I mean, because Kristen, they did make out. They were about to have sex. Granted, David did potentially have sex with a demon succubus pretending to be Kristen. We don't know if that's 100% in his head or whether because that could also lead into that complicated territory of like, well, for all he knows, there might be a demon out there that he impregnated that he might not know about. I mean, he hasn't been visited by demon Kristen since, so she might have gotten what she needed, because that was post him finding, like, the last time it's where the last episode ended, if I remember correctly, right? Or maybe it was near the end, maybe it wasn't the exact end, but I'm like, she didn't visit him at all this episode, but once again, George and the succubus constantly pop in and out over the course of the season, so might not see the last of that fake Kristen, so we'll see. But I'm like, that feels like that could be that weird territory where like the point is to kind of get her impregnated. You kind of impregnated a demon, or I feel like a priest impregnating a demon like that feels like almost like, it's a weird thing to kind of compare it to, but it's almost like Supernatural, how there's like those 666 seals that sealed Lucifer away, and you needed to break, 66 of them? Almost feels like that, where it's like, oh yeah, this is, well, and then you also, part of me was almost like, well, you don't think it's almost like a demonic Nephilim type of thing we're going to, I'm throwing that out there. Just, it feels like it could be that. I'm just, I don't know, just spitballing ideas there. It just feels like that type of thing of like, you're kind of impregnating evil type of thing. And that's kind of the purpose, but who knows? So he had to deliver a Bible. Did he actually leave the Bible in the room? I don't think I don't remember him taking it out of his bag and leaving it, but maybe he did. Because the point is wasn't he supposed to take the Bible to the room and leave it there or something? But he basically had to do last rites for a guy to pick up a postcard and then leave the door open. I was like, the fact that you have to leave the door open seems super shady, because that means you're trying to get someone access to that room that wouldn't be able to get access to it. Well, David asked Home Dude about it later, and it's like, okay, this is about facing the evil that is humans, and that guy was a messenger, and we're trying to make sure he couldn't get his message out or something, so he was poisoned, or was it that he was the good messenger and he was poisoned because they found out about what he was up to? I'm completely misinterpreting, because this all has to deal with Grace. The whole postcard thing was about making sure that it's their way of trying to find out, because last time we saw Grace was physically in season 1, because obviously she later on popped up to David when he was in the hospital. Regardless, this is about trying to protect her because she's believed to be a prophet. So the Vatican is trying to find her, make sure she's okay, because they think they might know her whereabouts, and this postcard could help. So it's about saving her. But it also seems like that job is also about killing people too. So that's why I was misinterpreting whether that guy was the messenger that had the message. Either like, oh, he had to die because he had this message and we couldn't take the chance anyone else would find out about it. Because he did say, like, right, we go after people who are murderers and torturers. We go after the human scum of the world. So he might have some correlation and connection to that. And maybe someone else in that room is the messenger that get left in the postcard. Or maybe that postcard was meant to be, oh, he's going to eventually go back to China and kill and track down and kill Grace. Like, maybe that's the implication in that regard. But this is about, like, right, not only killing bad guys, but also saving someone. So now David's like, oh, like, you could tell he wanted to walk away, but now knowing, like, oh, I'm potentially helping save Grace. Like, okay, so now I see a little bit more of the fight I'm helping join in this battle against evil. Like, it's a two-front war. I'm kind of handling it on my own with this whole being an assessor situation, but, like, this group is, you know, the not entity, handling it in their own right as well. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see what that how that plays out, because David hasn't quit, and I'm sure there's going to come up more and more, still keeping everyone in the dark. I did like that there is closure between him and Kristen to some extent, because Kristen was worried, like, because obviously they have feelings for each other, and since she confessed, she's worried that David's pulling away from her. But it's like, right, everything going on there, it's on me, it's not on us, because she misses what they had. It's like, now that's kind of gone, because things are kind of, you know, as Ben said, it's kind of awkward between them. But David's like, no, like, I'm still here for you. Everything I'm going through is kind of like Caprice stuff and not anything to do with you. So they're still friends. So that's good. I mean, I don't think it completely resolves the whole, oh, we have feelings for each other thing. I don't think that's completely resolved, but we'll see. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.